Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program where we study on Sundays and Wednesdays. On Sundays, I go through this book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment, chapter by chapter. Today we're on chapter 19, which is titled The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. This is where you learn a bit about the life story of Gotama Buddha and what motivated him on his journey to enlightenment and ultimately what he discovered. I also share content in this chapter about these three different challenges that human beings face, which is sickness, aging, and death, and how to overcome the challenges that we experience in those situations, because sickness, aging, and death tend to be some of the most challenging experiences that human beings face, and the mind is oftentimes very discontent, whether it's your sickness, aging, and death, or perhaps people that are close to you as they're experiencing sickness, aging, and death. You might find that you really struggle during this time. So not only do I share the life story of Gotama Buddha in this chapter, but also some content to help you overcome the challenges that you're experiencing in relationship to your own sickness, aging, and death, or people who are close to you. So I'd like to welcome all of you, because today I'm going to walk you through and help you to understand a bit about the life story of Gotama Buddha, and then we'll talk about sickness, aging, and death as well, as a way to help you understand how to face these challenges that you'll experience as a human being. Of course, as you make your way to enlightenment and the mind is enlightened, these sickness, aging, and death isn't going to be a challenge to you at all. You would have overcome all of that. But in the process of getting to that point, you will need some guidance to help you understand how to best deal with sickness, aging, and death for yourself and those close to you. So as we go in today's class, feel free to ask any questions that you like. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and I'll see that in the comment section. Or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. What I tend to do on this particular talk is just really share with you the life story of Gotama Buddha and kind of going through that all the way through before we actually open up to questions. So what you'll find in most classes is that I will be pausing every 15 or 20 minutes or so to open up to questions. But here, what I'm going to do is just share with you the entire life story of Gotama Buddha before I open up to any questions. So the story of Gotama Buddha, who ultimately becomes known as Gotama Buddha, starts with him at birth, where he's not a Buddha. Because in order to be a Buddha, there's three main criteria that one needs to meet, and he doesn't meet those at the time of his birth. So he's not yet an actual Buddha, and he wouldn't even have any knowledge at that point in time that he was going to be a Buddha, or anyone else would have any knowledge that he was going to be a Buddha at that time in his life. But he was his mother was a queen and his dad was a king. And as this time frame had it, that when the mother would be getting close to labor and delivery, she would go back to her homeland in order to deliver the child. And with her living in the kingdom with her husband, when it came time and close to the time of delivery, she got together with a caravan or an entourage, and they start taking her back to where she actually grew up and where her parents are. And as they're making their way back to her homeland, she goes into labor pain and they need to stop the caravan. And she gets out and she goes over to a tree and she reaches up and holds onto a branch of a tree and tries to deliver this baby standing up and helping the baby to come out of the birthing canal. But the baby couldn't come out of the birthing canal, so it ends up breaking through the side of her stomach. This was over 2,500 years ago, so she ends up dying about 7 days after delivery, where today we would have just done a C-section and she wouldn't have had any difficulties of sustaining her life. But during that time frame, that technology didn't exist, so the baby ends up breaking through the abdominal section of her body, and she ends up dying 7 days later. And part of the culture and custom during this time frame was that your sister would adopt your children as their own and raise them as their own. So his stepmother is actually his aunt, because death of a mom and or children during childbirth was not uncommon during this time frame. So that's the way that they would handle it, is that your sister would adopt your children, and now they are essentially your children. So his mom dies within the first 7 days of his birth, and his aunt adopts him as her own, and this is his stepmother. There's a certain portion of the story that is shared in the original source text, the Pali Canon, that describes the birth of Siddhartha Gautama. And there's a certain portion of it that I'll share with you here because it's in the original source text. But I have a feeling that this is an embellishment of the story, because if this part of the story was true, the next part of the story wouldn't actually be needed. It's said in the original source text that at the time of his birth, when he comes out, that he immediately walks 7 steps. And as he makes these 7 steps, lotus flowers are blossoming under his feet as he's making these 7 steps. And after the 7th step, he speaks clearly and says that this will be my last birth. I will never be reborn again. Again, I think this is an embellishment of the story, because if you understood that, and if that was actually true, the next part of the story wouldn't actually be needed. Because the next part of the story is that his father, the king, decides to summon some advisors, essentially fortune tellers, people who are going to advise him on what his son is going to become in life. So if this part of the story about his birth was true and accurate, his father wouldn't need to summon advisors to find out what his son's going to become. It would be pretty obvious by what he was supposedly experiencing at the time of his birth that, wow, this is quite amazing that these miracles are being performed. We would know that, okay, this is going to be some type of spiritual leader. So that's why I think that this part of the story is not accurate and not true, but it doesn't really matter, because we have the teachings that can actually lead to enlightenment, and you can see that for yourself. But nonetheless, I think that sometimes people embellish stories like this in order to try to make somebody look even better than they already are, which Gotama Buddha, by the time he dies, as you'll hear, he had an enormous impact to all of humanity, and he still does today. So picking up the story with the advisors coming in to advise his father, there's 108 advisors that come to advise his father, and 107 of them share with his father, the king, that his son is going to be this great monarch, this great ruler. He's going to rule over his kingdom, and he's going to expand his kingdom really far and really wide. And of course, his father, the king, is like, yeah, that's my boy. You know, that's what his father wants. Well, there's one advisor, the 108th advisor, heard all of this going on, and he came in last, and he apologized to the king because he heard what these advisors had shared, that his son was going to be this great monarch and this great ruler and this great king. And this advisor came in and apologized to the king and said, you know, I really apologize to have to deliver this news to you, that these other advisors, they're indeed correct that your son is going to be a great leader, but not in the way that you think. He's not going to be a monarch or a king and rule over your territory and expand your kingdom. Instead, he's going to be a great spiritual leader and help people in spiritual pursuits. Well, his father, the king, didn't like this. He wanted his son to be a monarch. So what he decides to do, just in case this one advisor is correct, is sequester his son into the palace and try to kind of woo him in and lure him into being a monarch through providing him all kind of lavish gifts and a lavish lifestyle. He gave him great food and fabrics and entertainment and beautiful women bathing him and taking care of him, and all these different things that a king and a very wealthy king would be able to provide to their son. So for the full 29 years of Siddhartha Gautama's life, he was in this lap of luxury, experiencing all the things that a royal family would be able to provide. But at the age of 29, he knows that he's about to become the king. During this time frame, you became the king when you were 30 years old. You didn't become the king when your father died. Instead, when you became 30, you became the king and your father would retire, and now your father would be there to help you to become a better and better king and guide you. In their retirement, they would help you to become a better and better king because they're right there to be able to help you. So at the age of 29, with Siddhartha Gautama realizing he's about to become the king and has never actually been outside the palace, he decides to make his way outside the palace and kind of sneak outside without his father knowing and understanding that that's what he was doing. So he sneaks outside the palace and he takes his royal attendant with him, which is this kind of advisor, this kind of chief of staff, so to speak. And he takes this advisor with him and he goes outside the palace and he starts making these observations. We call these the 4 observations. He observes a sickly person, an aging person, and a dead corpse. And when he sees the sickly person, he notices the despair and the misery with that person and the people around them. And he has to ask his royal attendant what was going on because he had never been outside the palace and he didn't know what was happening here. And the royal attendant had to explain to him that, this person's sick and the family isn't able to provide for themselves and they're experiencing grief and misery due to the inability of this person being able to work and things like this. And then he sees this aging person, this old and decrepit person who is making a very difficult time of trying to walk and move through the kingdom. And their bones are very old and decrepit. Their joints are having difficulties moving. And again, there's lots of grief and misery and despair around this person, the person themselves, and then their family members as well. And Siddhartha Gautama had to ask his royal attendant, what is this? What's going on over there? And the royal attendant had to explain to him, this is what happens as you age, as you go further in life, your body is going to get old and decrepit and have difficulties moving like this. And Siddhartha Gautama didn't understand that at the time because he was only around these very young people who his father ensured that he was just around young, vibrant people throughout his life for the first 29 years. And then he sees a dead corpse and he sees the family members grieving and misery and having displeasure and despair because their family member has died. And once again, he has to ask his royal attendant, what is this? Because he didn't even understand that at the end of this life that we're going to die. So his royal attendant had to explain this to him of what was happening and why. And these 3 observations had a big impact on Siddhartha Gautama. He realizes that there's all this misery and despair in the kingdom, and that this is what he would be ruling over as a king. And then he has the 4th observation, which is a roaming ascetic or a monk, somebody who's given up worldly life and worldly possessions and has decided to go on this journey to seek a better understanding of life and try to understand life and why we experience the things that we experience and getting to this enlightened mental state. And in this moment, Siddhartha Gautama decides that that's what he would like to do. That he's not interested in ruling over this despair and misery that is in the kingdom, because in his life in the royal palace, he didn't experience any of this. So it was like night and day for him to go outside the palace and to be able to see this. So when he goes back to the palace, by this time he had already had a wife and he had a young infant child and they were sleeping, and he decided that he was going to leave without letting them know. That he didn't understand attachment and he didn't understand discontentedness in the mind at this point because he wasn't enlightened, but he at least understood enough that he felt like if he picked up his son and kissed him goodbye or said goodbye or to his wife and gave her a hug, that it would kind of tug on him and he wouldn't be able to leave the palace. But he ultimately decides he's just going to look in on them and then kind of leave the palace in the middle of the night without anybody knowing. And he ends up taking with him his favorite horse and his royal attendant, because at this time he still has attachment. He doesn't understand craving, desire, attachment yet. So he takes with him his favorite horse and his royal attendant, and he makes his way outside the palace. And eventually he gets to the point where he decides to let his horse go and ask his royal attendant to go as well, that he was going to kind of go off and embark on this journey on his own. So he sits down and he has this very long flowing hair, and he cuts off his hair, because during this time frame in history, they didn't have photographs and technology for everybody to know who the king or the queen was. Like here in Thailand, they just have pictures everywhere all over the kingdom, so everybody knows who the king and the queen and the princes and other people are. But during that time frame, they didn't have that technology. So what they did is the royal family would grow this very long flowing hair, and this would be the sign to people in the kingdom that this is a member of the royal family, because commoners who were taking care of the fields and their businesses and their shops and their housekeeping and stuff like this, we would have to have really short hair, because otherwise our hair would be tangled up in a mess and dirty if we had this really long flowing hair. So it was only the royal family that had the time and the resources to sit around and have people combing their hair and taking care of it and detangling it. So by the time he gets to the point where he's cutting off his hair, this is like, I'm never going back. I'm never going to go back to be the king ever again, because nobody would ever believe that he was the king, because he had grown this hair for 29 years. And by just cutting it off, that if he ever tried to assume the throne and went out into the kingdom, the local people in the kingdom would never believe that he's actually the king, because he doesn't have this long flowing hair. We now know that one of the other benefits of cutting off your hair is to eliminate personal existence view and realize non-self and let go of ego and other things like this. But he didn't necessarily understand that at that time. So he cuts off his hair as a way of just, I'm never going back. And he goes off on this journey to seek enlightenment and try to train his mind. So when he first leaves, he ends up taking up training with one particular teacher. And this one teacher ends up teaching him all kinds of various techniques and tactics, because there was lots of different people amongst the kingdom that were claiming that they had gotten to enlightenment, and it was their teachings that would lead to enlightenment. So this first teacher teaches him to hang himself upside down from trees, to pierce his body with metal implements, to lie on beds of nails, to starve his body and not eat very much food, and do all these disparaging things to the body. Because the thought at this time was that if you could cause the physical body all types of pain, and your mind could overcome that pain, that you would get to enlightenment. So after training with this particular teacher for about 9 or 12 months, the teacher declares that Siddhartha Gautama was a master of his teachings, and that he would be able to now teach his teachings to other people. And Siddhartha Gautama said that his mind wasn't any more peaceful or joyful during that time frame and after he had mastered this person's teachings as it was prior to that. So he decides to go study with a second teacher. He realizes that his mind isn't enlightened. So he goes and studies with a second teacher. And this second teacher was pretty much teaching him the exact same things, to disparage the physical body in order to train the mind to overcome this physical pain. And once again, after about 9 or 12 months, this particular teacher declared Siddhartha Gautama as a master of his teachings, and that he could now share his teachings as a teacher. But Siddhartha Gautama noticed that his mind wasn't peaceful, it wasn't joyful, he was still experiencing discontentedness. So frustrated with all of this and the individual teachers and what they had taught him, he decides to go off into the forest by himself to try to figure out how to train his mind. And he takes this asceticism, where he's causing disparaging things to the body, all the way to the maximum. He gets all the way to the point where he's only eating 1 grain of rice per day. And if you've ever seen artwork or statues where his ribs are protruding and his facial bones are protruding and you can see his joints and he has very little meat on his body, it's just basically skin and bones, this is depicting that time frame when he really took this all the way to the maximum, where he was only even eating 1 grain of rice per day just to try to sustain the body. So he does this in the forest, even though he's by himself. He doesn't know anything else but what he was taught by these 2 teachers. So that's why he continues to do those things, even though he's in the forest by himself. But then there's this mother and young girl who come along, and they see him meditating, and they see his body and what is happening to his body with his bones protruding and his ribs showing. And they realize that he's on the brink of death and he's about to die. So they bring him some rice and ask him to eat the rice. And he reluctantly accepts this rice from the mother and the daughter and decides to start eating. And he realizes in this moment that if he lets the physical body die, that the mind wouldn't be here in this world and he wouldn't be able to train the mind. So it was unwise for him to take this asceticism as far as he has, that is him being on the doorstep of death. So he realizes in this moment and starts to understand this middle way that he ends up teaching. That he realizes that when he was in the palace, living a life of sensual pleasures and sensual desires with all the wealth and luxury that he had, that's not what led to enlightenment. And then when he led this life of disparaging the body and doing damaging things to the body, that doesn't lead to enlightenment either, because he was on these two opposite sides. He was on these extremes. So he ends up deciding to now start practicing this middle way, and he realizes this through now starting to eat this food, and he decides to start eating in moderation. And this really accelerates his understanding and his practice of what it takes to get to enlightenment. And then slowly but surely, over the period of time, he ends up discovering the teachings that it takes to actually get to enlightenment. His entire journey was 6 years long, where he went from the age of 29 to the age of 35, and he actually attains enlightenment at the age of 35. And he realizes that he's accomplished this goal because his mind is no longer angry or frustrated or irritated or annoyed. His mind is peaceful and calm, serene and content with joy, no longer experiencing any discontent feelings. But because his teachings are so vastly different than what was being taught at this time, he's not quite sure if he's interested in sharing these teachings with other people or not. So he goes to this tree and he kind of hangs out around this tree for about 7 weeks, contemplating whether he should go back to the palace and kind of assume some type of role in the royal family, or whether he should actually share his teachings into the world and help other people understand what it is that he discovered and that leads to enlightenment. So ultimately, after 7 weeks, he decides that he's going to share these teachings with other people. So he starts making his way back to the area where he was originally studying with those first 2 teachers. And as he's making his way back to this area, he encounters 4 of his previous classmates and 1 of his teachers, 1 of his old teachers. These are the first 5 people that he encounters as he's walking in that direction. And they see that he has meat on his bones, and they think that he's actually given up, and they start mocking him. And they start joking him because they think that he's given up on his pursuit to enlightenment. Because to them, in order to get to enlightenment, you need to be starving yourself. You need to be doing all these harmful things to the body. So with him looking fairly healthy, they thought that he had given up and then he had gone back to the palace. So they start mocking him and joking him. But of course, with an enlightened being, he's not affected by this mocking and joking. So what he does is he comes over to where these 5 people are, and he sits down and he takes his hand and he touches the earth, and he calls the animals from the animal realm to come to where he's at. Essentially, he's performing this miracle. He has deer and lizards and snakes and turtles and birds and squirrels and all these different animals just start coming towards where he's at. And these first 5 people realize that he's done something miraculous here, and they sit down and they start to listen to him and start to understand what it is that he has to share. So in this moment, he shares the 4 Noble Truths. This is the very first teaching that he shares. And when he shares this teaching, it's independently verifiable. He shares the problem in the unenlightened mind. He shares the cause of that problem, the elimination of it, and the path forward, how to completely eliminate the problem. This is the 4 Noble Truths. And if you've learned the 4 Noble Truths with me or in any of the resources that I share, then you understand what those 4 Noble Truths are and how they're independently verifiable. So while these 5 individuals were doing all these aesthetic practices, they could see within that first discourse and independently verify for themselves that he had indeed discovered what causes the mind to be discontent and how to actually eliminate it. So they knew in that first discourse that he had attained enlightenment, having performed the miracle and then shared what it took to be able to get to enlightenment in those 4 simple statements. From this point forward, he doesn't perform any more miracles because a Buddha doesn't need to keep performing a bunch of miracles to try to convince people of who he is. Instead, his teachings are independently verifiable, so he just starts teaching. And as he's teaching, more and more people are independently verifying his teachings and practicing, and they're observing that the condition of their mind is gradually improving, that it's moving from this anger and hostility to lesser and lesser versions of that until eventually the mind becomes peaceful peaceful and joyful. And this is how they know that he has discovered the truth, because as he shares his teachings as guidance and they're learning, reflecting, and practicing those teachings, they can see that the condition of their own mind is improving. And they can see that he meets the criteria of a Buddha. There's three main primary criteria that make a Buddha, is that they independently get to enlightenment by themselves, and they go on this journey to discover the teachings that it takes to get to enlightenment. And they do that without any help of any teachers or any guides. Then, after attaining enlightenment, they take those independently discovered teachings and they share them for the rest of their life, dedicating the rest of their life to helping others get to enlightenment. And now, during his lifetime, countless people for a Buddha would get to enlightenment because their wisdom is very deep and very profound. So countless people got to enlightenment during his lifetime. And then they need to preserve the teachings in such a way that countless more people can get to enlightenment after their death. So Gotama Buddha is observed by his students as potentially going to be able to meet these criteria, so they start understanding that he's an actual Buddha because he gets to enlightenment by himself. He's dedicating his life to sharing these teachings, and more and more and more, countless people are getting to enlightenment, and then his teachings are being preserved so that people after his death can get to enlightenment as well. So from the age of 35 until he dies at the age of 80, he's consistently teaching, and more people are getting to enlightenment. And the people that were sharing teachings of other disciplines are starting to come in contact with him. And in some cases, they will sit down and talk with him, and they will bring their students with them. And as they're talking with the Buddha would be sharing what his teachings are, because they're asking him questions about certain aspects of his teachings. And he would share that with them. And sometimes those individual teachers that were sharing teachings would get angry or frustrated or irritated, and they would storm off. And that person's students would realize in that moment that their teacher wasn't enlightened, because an enlightened teacher isn't going to get angry and frustrated and storm out of a conversation. So oftentimes that person's students would then become students of the Buddha. Or in some situations, the conversation would go such a way that that particular teacher would be convinced through asking the Buddha questions about the Buddha's teachings that the Buddha indeed discovered what it took to get to enlightenment, that that particular teacher would then become a student of the Buddha and bring their students along with them. And this community of students who are learning with the Buddha and people who are getting to enlightenment just continues to grow and grow and grow. But in that region of the world, not everybody understood that he was an actual Buddha. A Buddha isn't going to go around and constantly claim to other people that they are indeed a Buddha. There isn't any outward indication or outward characteristic that proves that someone is a Buddha or isn't a Buddha. It's these three criteria that people know that a Buddha, is that they independently get to enlightenment on their own, they dedicate the rest of their life to sharing those teachings, and countless people get to enlightenment, and then they preserve their teachings so that others can get to enlightenment as well. A Buddha that is not known to be a Buddha is actually more effective and can actually do their work more effectively by people not knowing that they're an actual Buddha. Because if everybody knew that somebody was a Buddha, when they come around that person, they would most likely be on their very best behavior and kind of show a certain side of them that is their very best behavior. Well, one of the things that a Buddha has is they have the ability to observe the mind of their students, and then when they see that they're having certain challenges in certain areas, they can then offer them teachings to be able to help them. But if everybody was on their best behavior around their teacher, then the teacher wouldn't be able to observe the true qualities of their mind and then be able to offer them teachings. So people not knowing who a Buddha is actually more effective for the Buddha and for the world, because now this individual who is a Buddha is able to then share teachings with people by observing the natural state of their mind, because people wouldn't know that they're an actual Buddha. So he doesn't go around and constantly claim that he is a Buddha. At different times, he does share with people that he is a Buddha because he needs to let people know what a Buddha is. He needs to teach them what a Buddha is. But he doesn't do that constantly. He just focuses on sharing the teachings that will guide people to this enlightened mental state. And he teaches for 45 years. And then after his death, they end up writing down his teachings because during his lifetime, his teachings were all oral. There weren't any teachings that were written down during his lifetime. And every 2 weeks, he would have his students chant in order to recite the teachings and commit the teachings to memory. So it wasn't until after he died that people wrote down the teachings. There was this first council of 500 enlightened beings of his students that came together. And there were other enlightened beings as well, but 500 of them came together shortly after the Buddha's death and started to write down the actual teachings and capturing them in written format. And now his teachings have been spread all throughout the world, and they've really reached all corners of the world. And there's about 500 million people who consider themselves Buddhist. There's different traditions of Buddhist teachings that you will hear about that in a future chapter that I will be teaching you guys about these different traditions of teachings that kind of, spin off of what the Buddha actually taught. But it's the original words of a Buddha that is going to guide you to get to enlightenment. There's a certain quality in a person's mind who is going to become a Buddha, which is very different and very unique than the average person. An average person has a certain amount of capacity in their mind to remember certain things. So you can think of a human's mind as like a hard drive. It has 500 gigabytes or 1 terabyte of space. Then as you experience certain things in life, you need to delete old files in order to store new files. So in the last 5 years or so, maybe 10 years, you have perhaps fairly decent recall about what's been transpiring in your life over the last 5 or 10 years. But when you think about your childhood, you have very spotty memories about what transpired during your childhood because you've had to delete old files in order to store new files. Well, an individual who is about to become a Buddha, they don't have this limited capacity. They have an unlimited capacity in their mind to remember countless details about their current life and their past life as well. And this is how they accumulate enough wisdom over multiple lives and remembering that wisdom to then be able to attain enlightenment in their last life on their own without the help of any teachers or any guides. And the way that a Buddha functions is there's some event that occurs, and in this situation with Siddhartha Gotama, it was these 4 observations, and it's like a switch flips where their mind becomes highly discontent, and they don't get any reprieve from that discontentedness. Where like for you, you might get angry or frustrated, and then that arises, it changes, and it fades away, and then there's kind of a little bit of calmness and peacefulness until the next event or the next situation. But when this event happens, these 4 observations, it's like a switch flips, and the mind becomes so highly discontent that it doesn't get a reprieve. And now this individual is in a situation where they need to find a way to solve this significant problem that they have in their mind. And because a individual has this wisdom from countless lives, they now start applying different things that they know based on their accumulated wisdom. And if something leads to their improvement of the condition of their mind, they know that this is part of the path to enlightenment, and they retain it as wisdom. But if they try something to work to improve the condition of their mind and it doesn't work, they discard it. So by the time they get to enlightenment, the only thing that they have in terms of wisdom to be able to get to enlightenment is the true path to enlightenment. So a Buddha has deep, profound wisdom of what it takes to actually get to enlightenment. And then for the rest of their life, they're going to lay down lights along this path and illuminate this path to make it as clear as possible for anybody and everybody that would like to get to enlightenment of what this path is. An individual who gets to enlightenment, they're also going to be experiencing the peace, calm, serenity, and contentedness with joy, but they're going to need teachers and they're going to need guides. And the average person is going to need teachers and guides. But every so once in a while in history, there's this rare individual that arises in the world that we refer to as a Buddha who meets these 3 criteria. And the last Buddha that the world is currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago. So everyone else is going to need teachers and guides to help them get to enlightenment. And as a result of that, the average person, maybe what they learn out of the whole totality of their path to enlightenment, maybe 80 or 90% of what they learned actually led to their enlightenment, where there's kind of like 10 or 20% of baggage that is still sticking around, but nonetheless, this person still got to enlightenment. With a Buddha, that isn't the case. With a Buddha, anything that doesn't work to get to their enlightenment, they completely discard it and get rid of it. So by the time they get to enlightenment, we consider them fully, perfectly enlightened because they don't have any extra baggage. Where an average student, they might still hold on to a few things here and there that didn't actually lead to their enlightenment, just maybe out of respect for their teacher or some other reason. But a fully, perfectly enlightened Buddha isn't going to do that. And they've accumulated this wisdom over multiple lifetimes. An average enlightened being can potentially see their past lives, but it's not going to be with the same level of detail and understanding of what a person who's going to become a Buddha would have complete recall of their current life and even a lot of detail of their past lives. So all of this wisdom accumulates to the point where they're then able to get to enlightenment on their own. And now they share their teachings, those independently discovered teachings, they share those with whomever is interested in learning. They don't create rules and commandments and punishments and rewards. Instead, they've already gotten to this peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy, and they make themselves available for the rest of their life for all those who have a sincere interest in getting to enlightenment. And they provide this as guidance, not as rules or commandments or anything like that, but as a way of helping individuals understand the natural laws of existence, and namely this natural law of Gotama. Because a person who is a fully, perfectly enlightened Buddha can see these natural laws very clearly in the world, in particular the natural law of Gotama, this cause and effect and action and result. They have deep, profound wisdom of these natural laws and what it takes to get to enlightenment. So now all those who have a sincere interest in learning and practicing to attain that same mental state, they will share those teachings with them. They're not going to use guilt, shame, and fear in order to get people to learn their teachings. They're not going to use miracles or anything like that. Instead, just anybody who decides to come and learn, they're going to then share those teachings as a way of guiding. And they oftentimes are only teaching when people are asking questions. If people ask a question, they will share teachings. They might have a certain schedule, like the Buddha, he had on the lunar schedule, he would teach every 7 to 8 days. He would have these big gatherings where people would come based on the lunar schedule in order to come and learn. And they knew that he would be teaching on those particular days. But then during the week, he would only teach if people asked him questions and was interested to learn. He wouldn't go out into the world and try to force his teachings onto others. Instead, he waited for people to ask him questions and be interested to learn what it is that he had to share and what led to his mental state. And people could observe that he was enlightened because they always saw that he was calm and gentle and peaceful and loving and kind and generous. He was compassionate and friendly, polite, respectful. All of these qualities and others are observable in an individual's mind who is enlightened. If you spend enough time around people, you can observe this for themselves. And where you see people becoming frustrated and irritated or argumentative or bitter and harsh, you can tell that they're not enlightened because an enlightened being wouldn't function that way. So this is essentially his life story of what his birth was, his early life, his journey to enlightenment, and then his teaching career, and then how his teachings were preserved after his death. And it was these 3 observations of sickness, aging, and death, and then the 4th observation of an ascetic that really motivated him and encouraged him to actually go on this path to enlightenment. He wanted to understand why people were so discontent and why they experienced this sickness, aging, and death, and how to help them escape out of that. And what he ends up discovering as part of his journey is that people are discontent and in despair when they're sick because they're craving permanent health. The human mind in the unenlightened state is craving, desiring, longing, and yearning, wanting permanent health. not understanding the universal truth of impermanence, that as long as you're a human being, you're going to sometimes be sick. You can't escape that while you're in this existence, that you're going to be healthy sometimes and you're going to be sick. That's the physical body's impermanence. But as long as the mind is craving permanent health, then when there's sickness, you're going to be discontent. Or if you're attached to the certain activities that you want to go outside and do, and you can no longer do those things anymore, or you can no longer go see the people that you would normally see. If your mind's craving to do those things, but yet you need to stay inside to get healthy, you will be discontent because your mind's craving permanent health. You're craving to do those activities. You're craving to be around those people, and you can't do those things any longer. And then with aging, he understood that people were craving permanent youthfulness, and that when the body is changing due to impermanence, that this old decrepit body with its aches and pains, then you're going to get discontent because you're not used to that. And you're craving this youthfulness where you want to have this really young and vibrant body that is no longer the case because of impermanence. The body has aged. So as long as you're craving this youthfulness, then as you age, you will become discontent with this body because you're not comfortable with the impermanent nature of the body. And then when you get close to death and realize that this life is not permanent and that you're going to die, then the body can also experience discontentedness knowing that you're going to die. And you can have fear or other feelings where the mind's holding on, wanting permanent life. And this isn't possible. Because of birth, there's going to be death. And there's no way for you to escape that in this existence. And then the same thing occurs not only with your own life, but related to the people that's close to you. That if you see your mom or your dad or your children or siblings or friends or family, when they're sick, you might become discontent because you're craving for them to be permanently healthy. Or if you see your parents or grandparents aging or your life partner aging, you might become discontent because you're craving that permanent youthfulness. Or if people close to you are dying, you might be discontent because you're craving for them to permanently exist in the world. Oftentimes we think that it's love that causes grief when someone close to us is dying, but in reality it's the craving for permanence and wanting this person to be permanent. And when the Buddha discovers the universal truth of impermanence, he discovers craving, desire, attachment, and how the mind's craving permanence, he understands and figures out how to escape and get rid of this discontentedness by eliminating the craving, desire, attachment. And at the same time that he figures this out, he also figures out that it's craving, desire, attachment that is leading to continuous rebirth. And as long as we are born, we're going to come into this world and we're going to continue to experience sickness, aging, and death. And as long as we have that craving, that desire, that clinging, that holding on to this world, wanting the world to be a certain way, when we get what we want, we get pleasant feelings. But when we don't get what we want, we get painful feelings. And now with the mind holding on to this world, the mind continues to crave and cling. So you keep being reborn over and over and over again. And as long as there's birth, there's going to be sickness, aging, and death. So by eliminating craving, desire, attachment, not only do you eliminate discontentedness of mind and get to this peaceful and joyful mental state, but you eliminate the causes and conditions that leads to continuous birth. So if you can eliminate birth, you can eliminate sickness, aging, and death. But as long as there's birth, there's going to be sickness, aging, and death. So you can eliminate craving, desire, attachment to eliminate discontentedness. And you can eliminate craving, desire, attachment, which is also going to eliminate birth, that there's no longer going to be rebirth because the mind is no longer clinging and holding on to this world and continuing to come back into the world over and over and over again. So what he ends up ultimately doing is sharing his teachings that help people to eliminate craving, desire, attachment, along with all the other pollutants that are in the mind. There's 10 individual pollutants that are in the mind referred to as the 10 fetters, or the taints, or the pollutions, or defilements. And he describes what these are and how to actually eliminate them through his teachings. And then as you learn these and you apply the remedies, you can observe that the condition of the mind is gradually improving because you know what created anger and frustration and other discontent feelings before. when you were in those situations and you experience those feelings, but as you're gradually training the mind in the way that the Buddha teaches, and you escape those feelings and you no longer experience them, then you know it's these teachings that led you to that improved condition of mind. But understand that it's gradual training, it's gradual practice, and it's gradual progress. Sometimes people think with the story of the Buddha that he sat under this tree, he meditated, and he instantly got to enlightenment. But this isn't what actually occurred. When you read his teachings and you see what he actually taught, he talks about this gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. That he went to this tree and he spent essentially 7 weeks contemplating whether he should share his teachings or not. It wasn't that he sat down and meditated and instantly got to enlightenment, but it was over that period of 6 years and predominantly 4 years, because that's when he was off by himself. That's what actually led to his enlightenment. The 2 years with those teachers, it taught him all the things that didn't lead to enlightenment. And now you can use that in your own practice, that you understand that if you're in meditation and you're experiencing pain, that the goal isn't to just sit there and suck up the pain, because the Buddha tried that and it didn't work. What you do is you adjust your body and you get in a more comfortable position so that you can start training the mind more readily. So there's certain things with the life story of the Buddha that you can extrapolate and benefit in your own practice. And we can talk about that as part of today's class and help you to understand his life story and what actually transpired, so that you can benefit from his life story and then apply that to your journey to enlightenment. So I've shared a certain level of detail about his life story, but now what I'll do is I'll open up to any questions that you guys have, and we can penetrate deeper into it and discuss it as you guys would like. We can discuss his life story. We can discuss this sickness, aging, and death. We can discuss any aspect of his teachings at all, and then I will help you to answer any questions that you have. You can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions directly. So it looks like we have a question here coming in on YouTube. It says, I'm not sure what that one word is. Does method ill mother can be problem in Buddhist practice, and how to deal with loving kindness on the situation? I'm not sure what you're asking there, unless there's a certain substance that you're asking about. If you could clarify that question, that would help me to be able to help you. Let me see if we have any questions in Zoom while you're working on that. I don't see any questions in Zoom. And let me check Facebook as well. See if we have any questions on Facebook. I don't see any questions on Facebook. So I just see this one question here in YouTube, and I'm not quite sure what that word is. If you could clarify that. Looks like we have a hand up in Zoom. Marcy, if you'd like to ask your question, you're welcome to.
Quite sure what that.
Good morning, Teacher David. So my question is, let me read that. I'm sorry. I apologize, David. I'm watching YouTube and then I'm trying to log on. Thank you for your patience. So the aging, sickness, and death, I understand those, but when you are having discontentedness of death, I had a recent situation where an animal was his life was taken by choice, and I am dealing with someone that is in this woe is me, blame me, like, oh, why does this have to happen? And I want to say, well, it was your choice to do this, and that's why you're feeling like this. But I myself am finding immense amount of discontentedness, an immense amount of pain involved for myself, and I'm having a hard time. I'm trying to meditate to learn to let go, but it's almost like I've got this hard thing in my throat, and my chest actually feels pain.
Okay, so you already know that any discontent feelings you're experiencing, it's due to your own cravings, desires, attachments. And then when you're experiencing those bodily sensations, that's the bodily sensations helping you to see that discontentedness is arising. So you need to investigate the mind and discover what are the cravings, desires, attachments. Are you attached to the person and them being well? And when you see them being discontent, that because they're not peaceful, you're getting discontent? Are you attached or craving for the animal? What is it that your mind is wanting? There's something that your mind's wanting, expecting, craving. There's some permanence that the mind wants. And because the mind's not getting that, that's why it's experiencing this discontentedness.
So with that reflection, it is my child, so I know I have that attachment to my child. So when she calls and the cry that she has is so just, it sets off these mother alarms in my head where it's just so painful, and I feel so helpless that I can't take away her pain. So how do I let go of that, but still be compassionate for her? And then the other tenfold is that the dog himself, like, I just feel so heartbroken that, one day he got in the car with his mama and then was excited, to go on a ride, and he showed up this place, and then he didn't exist anymore. So it's like, that's the two things that I'm really battling to try to, like, I know that that's where my attachments lies, but how do I stop those attachments?
Yeah, so if you're attached to your daughter and you're wanting your daughter to be permanently happy or permanently peaceful, you need to come to terms with understanding that she's not able to do that because her mind's got craving, anger, and this ignorance or unknowing of true reality. She's not enlightened. Only an enlightened being is going to be permanently peaceful and joyful. So her mind is still having these 10 fetters. So there's going to be times where she's happy and excited. There's going to be times where she's sad or angry or frustrated. There'll be times where she's kind of calm and pretty peaceful, here and there. But it's only a matter of time before she becomes discontent. So you're going to need to train your mind to let go. So you already know breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and generosity are the generalized trainings that you're doing. And then as these situations are happening, what this is doing is it's triggering your craving, and now your discontentedness is arising, and you're not comfortable with that, of course, because you don't like those painful feelings. So what you're trying to do is cut that off and cut that off and cut that off, and realize that it's not going to be instantaneous, because oftentimes we have deep attachment to our children, to our life partner, to our parents, to our siblings. And those people oftentimes have a lot of attachment to us. So it's not as easy as just cutting it off and letting it go, even though that's what I say. It's really that this craving has been triggered. Now there's this discontentedness that's coming up into your mind, and you're having to continue to apply your breathing, mindfulness, meditation, your generosity, continue to do that over a consistent period of time. And then each time your craving is getting triggered and your discontentedness is arising, you keep trying to cut it off and cut it off. And now you redirect the mind and realize that you're probably going to feel quite miserable for a number of days or maybe weeks. And over time, this will gradually subside, that it's not permanent. You're not going to permanently feel this way, but you need to kind of walk through the fire in order to appreciate the fresh air on the other side. So these cravings need to be triggered in order for you to be able to get to the point where you're dissatisfied with this attachment and you don't want anything to do with it, and you keep cutting it off and cutting it off. And what you'll need to do is learn how to have a relationship with your daughter without being attached to her and wanting her to be a certain way. So as you're going through the next several weeks, just understand you're going to feel this discontentedness, because this is most likely one of your most significant attachments that you have. And the only way for you to get rid of it is to continue to stay dedicated to your breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and your generosity. And then whenever that craving is triggered and the discontentedness is arising, that you attempt to cut it off and let it go, but realize that it's such a deep attachment that it's not going to be as easy as just, oh, let me cut it off and let it go. It's not like somebody stepped on your shoe and you're getting frustrated and you can kind of cut that off, like, yeah, no big deal. All right, I'll wash my shoes when I get home. This is your daughter. This is a being that was inside of your stomach, and it was a part of this body. So your mind has lived life with this being for so long that the mind is just holding on to it. So there's ways to let go of a relationship like this and train the mind to let go before you experience this. So like with my son, when he was 6, 7 years old, he would end up going to other people's houses and spend 2, 3, 4 nights there with them, and my wife and I would be away from him. And during that time, we might have been worried about what was going on with him or things like this. And each time he went away, we became less and less attached, where we weren't holding on so tight. And then, of course, like when he went away to preschool, he was be crying for the first week or two that he had to be away from his mom and dad because he was attached. So over time, if you know these teachings early on in their life, you can train your mind to let go and not have attachment and learn how to love without attachment. But I know your children, I think, are in their 20s or early 30s. So your mind is already attached. You don't have the benefit of going backwards in time and doing a lot of the things that I would suggest somebody do that has a young child. Now that your children are older, the only thing that you have the ability to do is cut off the discontentedness as it's arising and maintain your breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and generosity. And then gradually, slowly but surely, this attachment will be eliminated if you stay consistent with your practice. But you're going to need to experience those discontent feelings for a period of time before the mind finally decides to let go. And then even still, you get over this situation, there could be another one 3 months from now, 6 months from now. But if you do the work now, that next situation will be less impactful because you've let go of some of your attachment to your daughter.
And I appreciate that, Teacher David. And my other question to you is this: is that every time she calls me, she's always in pain, and I have been trying to I tell myself it's impermanence. I can't say these things to her because if I do make these mentions to her, it gets her more upset. So I say them to myself that this is impermanence. This was her decision. This is a result of her decision. And I tried to let go of, the discontentedness that I'm feeling. And then I would say, well, what can I do for you right now, Christina? But I'm not sure. I almost feel like I'm not strong enough to be able to not react. And I kind of fight back tears because I don't want to give in to that craving that I know that I'm having and that attachment. But I'm not sure if my conversations with her at that moment in time, am I being beneficial to myself and to her by being like that? Because it's almost like she thinks I'm being cold, but I'm not being cold. I mean, tears do come down my face that I cannot control, but I'm not falling into that blubbering and that, trying to reassure her that her decision that she made was correct, because I know it wasn't correct. But I guess I'm just really feeling pretty lost right now in my methods of how to handle this. It's very, very painful to watch your child have this much anguish.
Sure, I can understand. And what you're sharing, where you say, what can I do for you right now? To me, this is loving kindness and compassion. People who don't understand craving, desire, attachment, they're not going to necessarily understand when you say things like that this is your loving kindness and compassion. They're wanting you to commiserate with them. They're essentially down in the quicksand and they want you to jump down into the quicksand with them and help them get out. But that's not how you help somebody out of the quicksand. You've got to stay on solid ground with your 2 feet on solid ground and reach out a hand. And then that person needs to grab onto your hand and they have to do some kicking in order for you to pull them out of the quicksand. But they don't understand that, right? They want you to get down in the quicksand with them. So what you're doing sounds reasonable to me, that you're saying, what can I do for you right now? How can I help you? And because you're not commiserating with them and you're not down in the quicksand with them, sometimes people will blame you for being emotionless or not feeling the same feelings that they're feeling because they don't understand. They think that love means that you get upset and you get angry or you cry or you're miserable. but they don't understand that's craving, desire, attachment. That's not love. Because craving, desire, attachment is masquerading as love, when people see that you're not crying at a funeral, for example, they might blame you and say that you don't love grandma because you're not crying. But that's because they're misunderstanding what's causing their grief and misery. They think that's love, but it's craving, desire, attachment. So you'll encounter these situations where some people will try to judge you in that way, but this is helping you to understand the truth and just step back from it and realize that this isn't true. This is just that person judging you. But something I can share with you now that I understand a little bit more of the story, that your daughter is calling you to have these conversations. One of the things that you can do in order to help you eliminate your attachment, and it will also help her too, is that when she is calling you, sometimes don't answer the phone if you're not already doing that. Sometimes don't answer, and then don't call her back for several hours or maybe even the next day. You're not doing anything wrong here. What you're doing is you're introducing some impermanence into the situation so that she can get comfortable that mom's not always going to be there for her, and you're putting some impermanence into your mind that you're not going to always pick up the phone just because she's calling. And this is really helpful in a way that you can kind of get ahead of the curve on any attachment, even when somebody's not struggling like this. Just if there's somebody that you speak to regularly, it's helpful to not answer the phone sometimes. Or if somebody sends you a text message regularly, it's sometimes good to not answer for several hours or even a day or two, so that people's minds don't get attached to you and expecting you to answer them right away. This is the mind's craving that wants that. And if they get angry because you haven't replied to them in a certain time, or if they blow up your phone like they're calling you constantly, this is showing you that they have craving. And the best way for you to deal with it, to help them and to help you, is to not answer the phone or to not reply to the text message, and give it some space to breathe and allow your mind and their mind to let go. And this is one of the things that you can do to help you and help her.
I appreciate that, Teacher David, because I was finding myself that when she was calling, I was telling Vinny, no, I don't want to answer the phone right now. I because I knew I was having a lot of discontentedness, and I needed to be more clear-minded when I did speak to her. I wanted to feel a little bit more stable in my mind and not answer when I was so raw. So I have been doing that, but I probably should make a little bit more, because it would, ring, and then I would call her about 10 minutes later. You know what I mean? Maybe I may make that distance a little bit more, take a little bit more time. I gotta say that the pain when you hear your child cry in a very painful manner, when you know that their hurt is so deep, it's very, very triggering. And it's like I say, like the tightness in my throat and in my heart. And as a mom, all you want to do is just grab them and hold them and console them. But I know that, practicing this way, that I'm not really, that wouldn't be really that all beneficial to her, because I don't want her to think that I agree with the steps that she took. And I am interested in her understanding that the decision that made, there is going to be karma that comes after that she's going to have to deal with. But I also don't want to alienate her and not her think that I'm not there for her. So, but I appreciate everything, DJ David.
Yeah, I can share some more with you here, is that, holding your daughter and things like that, there's nothing wrong with that. That there's no harm in doing those kinds of things. This is her karma coming back to her, and this is your karma too, that you're attached. So you're experiencing, these feelings as well. But when she's hurting, and you know that she's hurting, and you want to take away her hurt, understand that the only thing that's going to take away her painful feelings is she's got to eliminate her attachment. And of course, she doesn't know how to do that. But ultimately, over time, her mind will slowly let go, and you can actually provide an environment where that's more likely to occur. So that's why when she's calling you, she's calling to talk about this situation and this dog. And by you calling her back within 10 minutes, it's allowing her mind to continue to hold on to this situation. So by you putting a lot more space, I'm talking about hours and maybe even a day, and you'll probably do this slowly, right? If you're normally calling her back in 10 minutes, maybe next time call her back in an hour. And then she does it again, you call her back in 2 or 3 hours. And then she does it again, call her back in 6 or 8 hours. Then do it again, you call her back in like a day. And each time it's getting further and further away where her mind's having to let go. And then when you are talking to her and she would like to talk a little bit about the dog, and she's talking about the dog in this situation where you see kind of a lull in the conversation, if you can redirect the conversation at that point to something else and get her talking about something else, this will help her mind let go of the dog and the whole situation of the dog, because that's the only thing that's going to help her, is that she's got to let go of the craving. And you can't let go of the craving for her, but you can create an environment in which it allows her mind to let it go by distancing, by not picking up the phone and calling her back so frequently, and by, when you are talking to her, to change the topic when it's the appropriate time, and then just redirect the conversation to something else and start talking about other things not related to this situation or to the dog, and that'll help her mind to let it go. But it's going to take multiple times of this for her mind and your mind to let go.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Teacher David.
Yeah, you're welcome. And if you would like to talk in a personal guidance session, you're welcome to do that, because the more that I understand what's happening in the day-to-day, the more guidance I can give you. So initially I didn't understand as much as I'm starting to understand now, so that's why I'm able to give you more guidance. So if you'd like to reach out, or even if your daughter, even though she doesn't study with me, she's welcome to reach out, and I will help her through this so that it's not just you that's helping her, that she has somebody else to talk to as well.
I appreciate that. That's very kind. Thank you, teacher.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, it looks like Christine, you have a question.
Yes, hi. Hello, Teacher David. Thank you, Marcy, for this question. I actually have a follow-up question on your question. So it just really clicked with me, this idea that somebody can have a craving for us to be constantly well and constantly happy. And I guess I'm on the other side of this dynamic. And I wonder how to deal with that if somebody close to us has this craving, besides not having a craving for them to not have the craving. Is there anything we can do? I noticed that actually this craving, it had an impact on my life in the way that, because I cannot fulfill this expectation, I always feel like I'm kind of disappointing the other person. So there's definitely some work to do within me, but probably also within the relationship.
Yeah, so if this is like your life partner or your parent, I would think something along those lines.
Yeah, the parent.
Okay, so the way to help somebody wake up, to get closer and closer to understanding true reality and what's happening in the world, is to provide them wisdom. And there's skillful ways for us to help others gain this wisdom, that even though they're not on the path, even though they're not understanding the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path or meditating or any of these other things, there's ways for you to skillfully help other people gain wisdom. So if I was you, Christine, and say like your parent was coming in and like, hey, you're not happy. Why aren't you happy? You got to be happy. I would just be like, Mom or Dad, whoever it is, I'm not enlightened. I'm only going to be permanently happy when I'm enlightened. I'm feeling sad right now, and that's okay. Yeah, but I want you to be happy all the time. Well, are you happy all the time, Mom? And she's like, no. I was like, okay, well, of course, a human being that is unenlightened isn't going to be happy all the time. And then the more calm that you can be, the more thoughtful, the more patient you can be, you can kind of skillfully help them see true reality. Because when there's craving coming up in the mind, it really muddles the mind. The mind becomes unconcentrated, it becomes unfocused, you can't see clearly. It's like almost like all your common sense is out the door. So when people's craving is coming up and they're becoming discontent, or they're craving for you to be one way or another, if you can calmly and patiently help them see true reality by giving them wisdom. And what you're doing is you're not just broadcasting, you're actually asking them questions. So things like, Mom, are you happy all the time? And she's like, no. Okay, well, why would you expect me to be happy all the time? And then she's like, I don't know, I just want to see you happy. Yeah, I'm sure you do, but that's just not the way it is, Mom. Thank you so much for your care, but only person who's really going to be happy all the time is an enlightened being, and I'm not enlightened. So you can do all of this very patiently, very calmly, very lovingly, with a smile on your face. When you have attachment and you're feeling irritated that your parent is doing this, it's very hard for you to be skillful in this situation. So the more that you don't have attachment to your parents or to a child, in Marcy's case, the more skillful you can be with selectively asking them questions and then helping them see true reality. Because when you ask somebody a question, they have to go internal and they have to look inside their own mind, find the wisdom, and they're almost teaching themselves. So if you know what the ultimate answer is, that your mom isn't happy all the time, but she's just not aware of that, and she's expecting you to be happy all the time, and you understand this impermanence, you can skillfully help her see that. And you might even drop in the word, see, Mom, that's impermanence. This whole world is impermanent. So you can do these kind of things selectively, and then gradually, slowly but surely, a person can gradually awaken to certain aspects of these teachings without even directly studying them. But it takes a lot of patience and a lot of time to do this, because even though you might do that now, 2 or 3 days from now, she might be doing the exact same thing again. She's not going to remember, because the mind is so polluted that it doesn't have good memory. So even though you might teach her something on one day, several days later or a week later, 2 weeks later, she can be right back having the same exact situation again. So that's why your calmness and patience and being willing to share these things repetitively, slowly but surely, a parent or a child or a life partner, you can kind of guide them along the path a little bit to help them get awake to a certain degree. But ultimately, to get to enlightenment, they have to be willing to do the work, which they may or may not be willing to do, but you can at least help them to a certain degree with certain aspects of their cravings.
Thank you. I appreciate.
You're welcome, Christine. Looks like we have some questions here on YouTube. We have a question from Bruce that says, can you touch again on how we can be with our illness when the body is experiencing pain or discomfort and not have aversion, like when we have the flu or other illness? Okay, so what I suggest when you're sick is to realize that this is completely normal. There's nothing wrong, right? Of course, if you're ill, you're going to go get medical attention and make sure you get the proper medication and proper interaction with a medical professional to get well. But just understand that this is normal, that the human body is going to be sick sometimes. And understand that in your sickness, not only can the mind be craving permanent health, but you can be craving certain activities, like I want to go to work, or I want to go outside and play, I want to go shopping, I want to go see my friend, or any plans that you might have. The mind can be craving all of those individual things. And understand that this is your mind clinging to certain decisions or clinging to permanent health. Your mind is attached, and you need to, in that moment, realize that all of these things are impermanent, that you can't permanently do 100% of what you want to do. So you need to pull back your wants and realize that you need to be sick sometimes, and just be sick, and just be really good at being sick. Because oftentimes when we're working in the unenlightened state, we kind of complain like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. I never get a break. I'm so tired. I wish I could just have a break, right? And then people are complaining when they're going to work. But then when they're sick and they have an opportunity to rest and relax and essentially do nothing but get well, then they complain like, oh, I don't want to be sick. I want to be at work. I want to be at work, right? And the grass is always greener on the other side. It always wants something it doesn't have. So realize that, okay, there's time to work and there's time to do those things, But then there's times to be sick too. And when you're sick, be sick and do a really good job at it. Eat good food, drink lots of great juices and fluids. If you need to watch TV, read your Buddhism books, watch videos, meditate, do all the things that you wouldn't normally otherwise have time to do, and just do those things really well, and just know that you're going to be sick, and that's okay. So train your mind to let go of these other things and realize that right now you can't do those things, but later you'll be able to. Later you'll be healthy. Later you will be able to do those activities. So just like health is not permanent, it's impermanent, this sickness is impermanent too. So remind yourself that when you're sick, just keep reminding yourself like, okay, this sickness is impermanent. I'm not going to permanently be unhealthy, because that's what the unenlightened mind is doing. Because of its craving for permanence, when you end up sick, the mind kind of feels miserable because it thinks this is going to be permanent now. Even though intellectually you know that it's not permanent, the mind is kind of dwelling in that and thinking that it is going to be permanent. So just remind yourself that the sickness is impermanent as well. These activities that you had planned, those are impermanent. You can do them at another time. Even if you miss something that's really otherwise important to you, then okay, you miss it. No big deal. You know, it's not the end of the world. Sometimes we feel like the sky is falling, but just understand that, you know, you can be sick and you can do a really good job at it, and it's not permanent, and you'll be back out there in the world at some point, and just do the best you can to relax and repair the body so that when you go back out in the world, you'll be healthy. And that's the best way to approach sickness, is just to understand that it's not permanent, just like the health is not permanent. Here's some more questions coming in on YouTube. This topic relates to my current health situation. Being diagnosed with cancer, stage 4, I am being confronted with a changing body due to chemotherapy and not a long outlook, although 10 years or more. Is in the cards. I try to not be attached or long for permanence, but it is so hard and depression takes over sometimes. Can you give some advice on how to best deal with this? Thank you. Yeah, the thing is that all of these cravings, desires, attachments, like what Marcy was explaining, what Christine's explaining, what you're explaining here, oftentimes, you guys haven't said this, but oftentimes what I see in the world is people think that the Buddha's got like these quick fixes, like there, you know, like there's one thing that you can do to instantly fix all of this. But it's important to understand that the human mind didn't get into this condition in just a couple of days or a couple of hours or a couple of minutes. So to unravel all of this, it's going to take a dedicated, determined, and diligent practice that you build up. That's why this first book is titled Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment, because it's a totality of many teachings coming together that you're encompassing the mind and you're fully training the mind to be able to train it to let go. Because something like sickness with cancer, where you're facing multiple situations where you're feeling unwell, and you're facing death in the near future, perhaps another 10 years or more, but still you know that there's a certain time where you're going to no longer exist in this world, and having a certain time frame when that's going to happen, you know, maybe it's on your mind. But there's nothing that I can say to you that says, do this one thing. Instead, what I would say is, if you're going to do just one thing, is start coming to classes, right? Start coming to learn the entire path to enlightenment. And that's going to include meditation. It's going to include studying the books. It's going to include getting personal guidance with a teacher. It's going to include developing your life practice, because this unenlightened mind has 10 individual pollutions in it that is causing it to experience the difficulties and struggles that it experiences in life. And you're going to need to unravel all of that, and it's going to take time. So if you become dedicated and determined and diligent towards the improvement to the condition of your mind, you can be reading this first book. You can be attending these classes regularly. Where you miss these classes, you can watch the replay and the recording. You can be doing meditation. You can be reaching out for personal guidance with a teacher. And you gradually build up all of these things in your life, where more and more you start training your mind to understand these natural laws of existence. That there's not just one thing that I could give you that's going to fix all of this, because it takes multiple years for a student to learn the entire path to enlightenment, because the ultimate fix is to get to enlightenment. That's the ultimate fix. That's where your mind's going to be permanently peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. But there's multiple things that you need to learn in order to get to that point. And this is actually a really good time for me, even though there's more questions that are coming in, this is a really good time for me to share this very last thing that I was going to share as it relates to this class and this difficult human existence, which is, no one ever said that life would be easy, but it's also not supposed to be tough. Learning Gotama Buddha's teachings is not easy, but learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha will ensure that life is not tough. Because when you don't understand the natural laws of existence, life is very tough. There is this difficult human existence. It is a real struggle and difficult to have an unenlightened mind and experience sickness, aging, and death. It's very, very difficult for the unenlightened mind to experience this. But the solution is to walk the path to enlightenment and gradually train the mind to improve the condition of the mind. And there's multiple facets of the path. So this group learning program that is restarting on August 13th, it's a 7-month program, and there's students of mine that have gone through that multiple times, and they've read this book multiple times. And then after they complete that program, then there's another program. It's called the Pali Canon and English Study Group. This is a 1.5-year program, and there's students that take that multiple times as well. So it's definitely dedication and diligence to learn and practice these teachings. It's not a 1-week thing or a 1-month thing or even a 1-year thing. But the thing is that as you're working forward on this path, it is a permanent solution. It's the last struggle of all struggles. It's the way to heal from what hurt you so that you never need to hurt again. So for some people, when they're like, oh my goodness, I need to study for like 3 years, 5 years, maybe 10 years in order to get to enlightenment. Oh my goodness, that's such a long time. But if you think about all of your life, of this life in your previous lives, if it takes you 5 years or it takes you 10 years, or even if it takes you 20 years to get to enlightenment, by the time you get to enlightenment, it'll be time well spent. Because if you understand the peacefulness and the calmness, the serenity, the contentedness, and the joy, you would spend 100 years, you would spend 500 years to be able to get to that mental state. It is that life changing. If I had a button and I said, press this button to continue to stay angry and frustrated the rest of your life, or press this button and you get to peacefulness and joy for the rest of your life, which button would you press? Well, of course, you would press this peacefulness and joy button. But the thing is it's not a button. You can't just press it and then instantly get peace and joy. It's this gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. But the way that I've set things up, I've made it as easy as possible with no obstacles, that you have access to books, audiobooks, videos, podcasts, classes, courses, retreats, personal guidance, and all of this stuff is available to you at no cost. But the one thing that I can't give you is I can't give you dedication or diligence or a determination. Each individual student would need to apply effort to be able to learn. I can remove all the financial barriers. I can remove all the obstacles of knowing what teachings to study and how to study them. And I can make myself available for the rest of this life for as many people to learn and practice as chooses to learn and practice. But ultimately, at the end of the day, each student has to be willing to apply the dedication and diligence to actively learn. And I'm here with you right along the journey, but each individual student needs to do the work and understand, like Marcy's learning, is that part of the path is that, yeah, you're going to sometimes struggle like this, because letting go of attachments is really painful. Because remember, the mind wants to hold on. It wants permanence. And when you're starting to let go of your attachments, you have to walk through the fire in order to appreciate the fresh air on the other side. So part of letting go of an attachment, using Marcy's example, is that you need to go through those painful feelings in order to get to the fresh air on the other side. That because the mind has been holding on to daughter for so long, as your mind's starting to let go of the attachment, not let go of her or the relationship, but let go of the attachment, the mind's going to start experiencing some painful feelings as you're making your way to get to liberation. And this is part of the journey that anybody who's gotten to enlightenment, it's not just the yellow brick road in, flowers and chocolates and, rose petals falling from the sky in order to get to enlightenment. It's real deep inner work that oftentimes is really a struggle. But that struggle is the last struggle of all struggles. And one of the things that the Buddha shares, and I agree with 100%, is that you shouldn't shrink back from your struggles. When you see these struggles occurring, what the mind oftentimes wants to do is it wants to push it away and it wants to run away from it. But what I encourage students to do is to turn around and walk towards the struggle. Because the whole reason why the mind is struggling is because it lacks wisdom. That's why it's struggling to begin with. So if we run away from that struggle or we push it away, we're just ensuring that that struggle is going to continue because we didn't use this opportunity to cultivate wisdom. So running away doesn't actually solve the problem. It just creates the opportunity for that situation to occur again because we didn't cultivate the wisdom. But when we walk towards the struggle, now we cultivate the wisdom. And the way that we walk towards the struggle is by reading the books, by coming to classes, by seeking personal guidance, by doing the meditations, by practicing generosity, by cultivating the mind with loving kindness and all the various facets of this path that we need to learn and practice. That's how you walk towards the struggle. And then as you cultivate the wisdom, then you will ensure that this struggle doesn't happen again because you've now cultivated the mind and you've developed the mind with the wisdom that you need. Whereas if we run away from it, the mind hasn't cultivated the wisdom and it's going to occur again. It's just a matter of time. So this particular class and some of the questions that you guys are having, understand that, yeah, it's tough. It's a struggle, but staying dedicated to learning and practicing and understanding that you are going to need to feel those painful feelings in order to get to the other side, because the mind's been holding on for so long and getting those conditioned pleasant feelings that now as it's starting to let go, it's going to end up in these painful feelings. And this is part of the journey, but it is the last struggle of all struggles. And you will heal from what hurt you if you continue to face the struggle rather than shrink back from it. So I added a bunch of things in there, even though it wasn't necessarily directly related to this question. But thank you for asking that question. And it looks like there's some follow-up here. It says, okay, thank you. I've been to a few of your classes in the temple and have the book. I will read more into it and start meditating more regularly again. Yeah, that would be very wise for you, is to start meditating and start, if you're able to learn at the temple or you're able to learn here online, is consistently learning, reading the book and not just believing the teachings, but learning, reflecting to independently verify and practice. And then as you learn and you have these struggles, you can come meet with me. You can come talk with me if you're here in Chiang Mai. You can meet with me privately in person. If you're traveling, you can schedule online and we'll meet in Zoom. And I will help you, because in these classes, I can teach very generally. And then when students meet with me privately, I can understand their unique situations and helping them learn how to apply these teachings to a specific situation. And sometimes we can do some of that in classes, but oftentimes private guidance works out much better that way, because I can ask you a bunch of questions, you can give me a lot of information, and then I can directly provide you the exact teaching that you need in any one particular situation. But if you don't have the underlying foundation established with your breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and the other aspects of the Eightfold Path, just giving you a teaching without you having the other aspects of the path, it's not going to really help you as much. In some situations, I can do that. Like today at the temple, there's a brand new student who got in an argument with a friend, and I was able to just kind of penetrate into sharing some teachings on right speech. Even though they had never really studied much with me before, I was able to do that in that situation. But some of these more deeper challenges, like meeting with chemotherapy in your death, that one is a much bigger challenge for the mind to deal with. So having the foundation first of the Eightfold Path, then as I know that you've got all of that on board, coming in with some more selective teachings will make a lot more sense for you. All right. So thank you for your questions. And if you guys have any more questions, you're welcome to ask those in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand. So it looks like Christine and Marcy, you guys have your hands up. It looks like Christine's in the queue first. If you would like to ask your question, you're welcome to.
Thank you, Teacher David. I have a question on sickness. Because I notice often when I'm sick, I'm kind of wondering, what did I do to cause this sickness? So I guess it's kind of part of the sickness is our own karma. But then it's also partly just a normal part of the human existence. So first of all, I would like to know, what is the relationship of these two factors causing the sickness? And then also how to deal with these kind of thoughts that usually just lead to blaming myself.
Yes. So as long as you're human, you're going to experience sickness, aging, and death. And it is our karma, because what karma is the choices of our or the results of our decisions. Everything we experience is a result of our decision, even getting sick. That if we would have gotten to enlightenment in a prior life, we wouldn't be here today continuing to experience existence. Therefore, we wouldn't experience this sickness. Or in some cases, we go out into the world. So like when I was in Washington, D.C. this past year in 2022, COVID was kind of pretty much on the way out, but not fully. And, I kind of knew that America had a lot more COVID than here in Thailand. And even though I had my vaccines and so forth, I went to a public place that was really crowded and I didn't wear a mask, and I ended up getting COVID. And this was a result of my decisions, where I could have either chosen not to go to that public place, I could have chosen to wear a mask and all these other things. So that COVID was the result of my decisions. So even if it was, just in, normal contact and you get the flu, for example, this is also the result of our decisions, because we went out, we chose to be in that environment. So it's not that we're causing the sickness. It's not that we're at fault. That's sometimes how people think about karma, is they feel like, well, I'm at fault. That's not what karma is. It's the cause and effect relationship. It's a sequencing of events. So the fact that we are human, we're going to get sick. That's just the sequencing of events. And then the fact that we come in contact with other human beings means that we're going to, in some cases, get certain illnesses and contract these illnesses. And this is part of our decisions and being a human being and going out into the world. So it's not like you can stay inside your house all the time and never see anybody and then you'll never get sick. Because even in this situation, if you lived in a cave by yourself, you would still get sick at some point, I'm pretty sure. So it's a sequencing of events, of cause and effect, rather than someone being at fault. That's not the way to view the natural law of karma.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. So looks like Marcy's next. If you'd like to go ahead and ask your question, Marcy.
Sure, Teacher David, thank you. So I'm not sure if you remember where I had discussed with you that I had a very difficult client that I would work with that was a very needy client. They had a lot of drama. I'm going to faint. And remember we talked about I would take space between us. I'd go downstairs, do her laundry or whatever. Well, since then, I have earned my certificate, which now allows me to be paid at a higher rate, which she cannot afford. So they've taken this client away from me. But I stuck with this client because I wanted to practice loving kindness, generosity, and be able to practice singleness of the mind, because she was very needy and she had so many tasks to do. Well, by practicing Gotama Buddha's singleness of mind, by practicing loving kindness and generosity, I was able to accomplish all of these tasks that this woman had for me in a 3-hour period. Since then, my employers have taken her off of my schedule because she no longer can afford my hourly rate, and they passed it on to another home health aide that's at the lower rate. Well, I got a call from my employer the other day stating that the expectations that I had set forth have now made it very difficult for someone to come in and fill my slot. And they basically kind of almost literally broke down every bit of every step of every minute of everything I did. And I explained to them how I did stuff, the order of process, how I did this, how I handled the client. And I was told that pretty much I had set this client up for certain expectations that no longer can be fulfilled by other home health aides. So I have this sense of almost guilt, but not so much like, I guess it's more like guilt and sorrow, because now I have this client whom I have cared for is now, very frustrated. I have a coworker who left the house very upset and crying, and I feel almost responsible for the situation that I have created. And I don't know if that's a legitimate feeling or a legitimate blame that I should be taking on, or where it is. And of course, with the stuff that's going on with my daughter, I could be just very, very cluttered and muddled right now.
Okay. So you're going to need to get closer to right view in this situation, where you might have right view that whenever you experience discontentedness, that it's your cravings, desires, attachments. You're going to need to understand that as it relates to other people too. So your client who's frustrated that somebody else isn't doing what you do, that's frustration is being caused by that client's craving, desire, attachment. They're craving for your coworkers to do things exactly your way. They're craving permanence. Same thing with your coworker who left upset from the residence. They have certain cravings, desires, attachments there that's causing them to be upset. And even your employer, your bosses, and they're craving for you to be a certain way. Of course, none of these people understand that, but you need to understand it. And that's what's going to take care of your guilt, where you understand that you're not causing the frustration of your client. You're not causing the coworker to be upset. You're not causing your employer to be upset about what you're doing either. In this situation, you're just going to work and you're doing the very best job that you know to be done, and these other people are choosing to have craving, desire, attachment. And it's really unfortunate that the world is so unknowing of true reality that they're causing their own frustration, because remember, the unenlightened mind is going to typically look for someone else to blame. When they are feeling upset, when they're angry, when they're discontent, they're going to try to look for someone to blame. And if they're blaming you, you need to understand with 100% certainty that you're not causing their discontent feelings. And if you're able to sit down and help them to understand, you can, but it's very challenging in an environment where they just have no background of these teachings whatsoever. And you can just do some simple things where you can say, well, when I went to work, I just did whatever I thought was best. And I was servicing the client because I felt like this was the best thing for the company, that if I went there and I did a good job, that's all I was doing a good job. And I apologize if that's made you feel uncomfortable that I have done this work, but when I showed up to work each day, I just did what I thought was best for the client and what I was capable of doing, and I thought that would be good for the company. Because people oftentimes, when their craving is arising and they're having all these discontent feelings, they can't see through that, wow, we've got this really great employee that has been doing a really knock-up job, and the client really wants this employee to continue to work there, and our other employees aren't doing the same level of service. Instead, when they're experiencing their own uncomfortable, painful feelings, they're looking for someone to blame rather than realize it's their own cravings, desires, attachments. So as long as you know what's going on, and then you can politely potentially help them in the same way that I was talking with Christine about skillfully helping a parent, there's skillful ways to help an employer or a coworker or a client, but it's not going to be just one conversation and aha, they got it. But as you get better with it and you practice being skillful with helping them see that you're not causing their anger and their frustration, then it will get easier with each situation that you're involved in.
Yes. So because we had made a conversation about be careful about what you apologize for. And so I never apologized for the work I did, but I did explain to them that what I practiced was singleness of the mind, where I just looked at the list of tasks that she had. I basically organized it in a manner where time-wise I could do certain things like start the laundry right away. And I went down the line and I explained to them that that's how I did it. But they told me that, at this point that I had set up these expectations that now they are going to have a hard time trying to correct. So I don't know if maybe I should offer to go back and still work for or care for this woman at the lower rate, which is something that I would be willing to do. But I don't know if that's me also trying to coddle them and take away their discontentedness. I got to be honest with you, David. I'm in a spot where I'm feeling more muddled than I have in a long time.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a lot going on, and I don't recommend that you apologize for causing their discontentedness, because that you didn't cause their discontentedness. But sometimes it's best to apologize that you feel that, so like if this boss is coming to me and saying, you set all these expectations and now the client's upset that our other workers can't do that, and you did this wrong. I might say, well, I apologize that you feel that way, right? That you feel that I'm the one who created this situation, but I can assure you that I didn't create this situation. All I did was went into work each day and just did a really great job in what it is that I could do. The fact that the client has the expectation that this new coworker is going to do things exactly the way that I didn't cause that. Her own mind is causing that. Her mind is deciding that she wants this other employee to be exactly the same as me, and this is not possible. Two employees can't function exactly the same way. And rather than blame me for this, let's be sure we look at true reality and see that the client's mind is wanting something that is not possible. It's not possible for two people to do things exactly the same way. And while I understand you would like to blame me for this, I didn't cause this. All I did is went to work each day and did a really great job. So, this is the way that you can talk with an employer and help them see more of reality. And it's going to take a lot of talking for them to be able to understand it. And it's going to take a lot of wisdom on your part in practicing right speech to be able to help them see through their own delusion, their own confusion, their own misunderstanding. And this is what the challenge is living in a world with people who don't understand these teachings and that are coming from all of this confusion. But each situation, if you take your time and you gather your thoughts and you put together some ways of talking to each person, and you're going to make mistakes along the way, but each time you can get better and better at it and helping them see more and more clearly that it's the client's mind that she's causing her own frustration because she's wanting you and this other employee to be exactly the same. And this is where you can start asking questions. You can say, okay, Mrs. Boss or Mr. Boss, this employee is wanting me to be exactly the same as the other employee. So her mind is craving permanence. Let's look around the world. Is there anything here in the world that's permanent? Can you help me to find something that's permanent? And you need to do this in a very humble way and asking them questions very respectfully, because they don't understand the universal truth of impermanence. And that's the big problem. So by you helping them see that the client's mind is craving permanence and there is nothing around them that is permanent. So you need to help the employer to be able to see that. And sometimes just sitting down with them in a casual conversation and asking them questions, you can kind of politely guide them to understanding about the universal truth of impermanence without using the B word, the Buddhism. You can help them look around and discover some of these natural laws.
Thank you, Teacher David. I appreciate the reminder about right view. Mm-hmm. I was cluttered on that, and I did lose sight of that. I appreciate that a great deal. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's very easy to try to, when you have this loving kindness and compassion that you're building up, it's very easy for the mind to kind of think that you are at fault, especially when you've got multiple people around you blaming you for their frustration and their being upset. You can get to the point where you feel very guilty and very shameful. But as long as you maintain right view and you understand that just like your mind causes its own discontentedness, all these other people are causing their discontentedness as well. And when you look out at the world, you're going to just see this whole sea of discontentedness. It's like an ocean of discontentedness, one wave after another, and people don't even realize that they're causing their own discontent feelings, and they're going to be looking for someone to blame. And if you're around, they're going to try to blame you for that discontentedness. So by you staying clear on your own right view that you're causing your own discontentedness, then you can also understand that with everyone else as well. All right, looks like we have some more coming in here on YouTube. Teacher David, I have this fear if my mom last request is to convert to Christianity. Any skillful way to reject her on this? I don't suggest that you think about it as you're rejecting your mother. I think this is kind of a strong word. I would think of it as your mom has a craving, it sounds, for you to be Christian, and you're not interested in being Christian. And if your mom is asking you to convert to Christianity and this is her craving, you can just smile and say, I understand, Mom. I understand you would like me to be Christian. And you can just smile, and that's it. And then just change the subject. Okay, that's enough of that. Okay, so that's enough of that. So what I was saying is that you can just share with your mother that you understand that she would like you to be Christian. You can smile, and then you can just redirect the conversation to something else, right? And if she keeps asking you over and over, just keep doing the same thing. Just say, yes, I understand, Mom, you would like me to be Christian. Just smile and just redirect the question to something else. Because eventually she's going to extinguish her craving and realize that every time she asks you to be Christian, you just keep redirecting the conversation to something else. So this is the way that you can deal with something like that. This is somebody that has craving. But don't think of it as you're rejecting it. Think about it as you're gradually helping her to let go of her own craving. That as she's coming at you with this yearning and longing for you to be Christian, you're just looking to kind of move past that. You're just smiling, maybe saying, yes, I understand, Mom, you'd like me to be Christian, and then just change the subject to something else. You don't have to say yes, you don't have to say no, you can just move on to something else. And if she keeps trying to come back to it, just, if you need to, just be like, Mom, I'm going to go to the bathroom, I'll be back. And you just go away, just wash your hands in the bathroom, wait 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then you come back and just change the subject to something else. Just start talking about something else and help her mind to move past this. All right, here's something else coming in on YouTube. Thank you. I would like that. Just got back to Europe, where I will remain for 3 months to have a remaining chemotherapy and operation. Later in the year, I will be back in Chiang Mai. Yeah, so if you come back to Chiang Mai, you're welcome to meet here, or while you're in Europe, you're welcome to schedule appointments by going to buddha-dailywisdom.com. You'll see where you can schedule appointments with me. It'll show you available times in your own local time zone, and it will send me notification, and then we'll just meet in Zoom, and I'll be able to help you there with any challenges that you're having. And if you've already been doing some work of studying the book, that you're meditating, that you're learning the Eightfold Path and attending some of these classes, as we meet privately, it'll be really easy to build up your practice more and more, because you've already got a really good foundation for the teachings. And then it'll make our time together even that much more beneficial for you, because you're just building on top of the foundation that you're already establishing through some of the already established books and resources and things like that. All right, let me see if we have anything else coming in on any of our platforms. If there's anyone in Zoom that has a question, you're welcome to raise your hand. All right, well, I don't see any other questions coming in, so it looks like this is the end of our class. I would like to just end by thanking all of you for joining and asking questions and being interested to learn. There's a lot of people that have joined in all of our different platforms and actively learning, and there's a lot of students who are learning even outside of the live classes, our podcast, our videos, and things like this. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that are learning these teachings. And I always admire people who are choosing to do this work, because it is hard work. It's really difficult. It's not so easy, but it's not super difficult either. If you have the resources, if you have a teacher, if you have the dedication and willingness to learn, you can gradually learn these teachings and build up your practice. And I really admire people who dedicate a certain portion of their day to doing that inner work, to meet with those struggles and those challenges. So I'd like to thank all of you guys for putting in that work and learning and practicing and training your mind, because it's the best thing you could do for yourself, for all of those close to you, and all of humanity. The next class, next Sunday, what we're going to be doing is we'll be in chapter 20, which chapter 20 is Animal to Human, the evolution of our consciousness. This is where you're going to start learning a bit about the cycle of rebirth and how the vast majority of human beings are being reborn out of the animal realm. And I'm going to help you see how the human consciousness is moving from these animal existences that has been conditioned from our animal existences, that even though now we're in the human realm, the unenlightened mind functions very much like an animal to a lot of respects. So we can overcome that by training our mind and understanding this animal to human evolution of our consciousness. So if you read the chapter either before or after class, you'll get much more benefit out of the class itself. But that's the topic that we're going to be discussing next week. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be doing loving kindness meditation together. So you're always welcome to join for that, where we can encourage, support, and motivate each other in our meditation practice. And then, of course, on Saturdays, we have our Pali Canon and English study group, which you're always welcome to join that, where we start with meditation, we do meditation together, and then we start studying the words of the Buddha as a study group. So thank you all again for joining. Thank you for your questions and your participation in the classes, in the online community, and all the other places that these teachings are shared. We'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Sawadee Kap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.